Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Incuto podcast. I'm Andrew Rabbitt. I'm the CEO of Incuto, and I'm really pleased to welcome Robert Kelly, the CEO of ABCUL, to today's discussion. Robert, thank you so much for agreeing to join us. Maybe just give us a bit of background about yourself and tell us who you are and what ABCUL is and what you're up to.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for the opportunity to join today. So for anyone that doesn't know, I'm Robert Kelly, the ABCUL CEO. I've been in post since September 2018, and for 10 years before that role, I was the CEO of NHS Credit Union in Glasgow, and running. So I've went from a practitioner perspective over to the trade body. I've had a long history with the association, been on the board for 8 years, and was president for 4 years between 2014 and 2018, and then later on in that year took over as chief exec, and a long career in financial services, some of which in the credit union sector, some in other organisations like PwC and Morgan Stanley. So a wide-ranging sort of experience and career within financial services, but certainly now where I feel most at home is within the credit union sector, where we're building financial resilience and doing the right things for consumers and members all across the country. So ABCUL is the main trade body within GB. We serve just over around about 62% of the total credit unions in GB, so that roughly 280 odds, and we've got just over 170 of those. That number obviously has come down quite steeply in years gone past. And our role is very much to drive forward the lobbying agenda, the legislative reform details that we're working on with Treasury and regulators at the moment to push the agenda for the credit union sector with regulators, to talk to stakeholders, to provide all of the expertise and training and advocacy role to our members, and to build relationships within the wider sector to make sure that wherever we can, that we have a cohesive voice and we're talking in a united way to anyone that's linked, any of the stakeholders that are linked.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because as a sector, it seems to have gained, whilst it's been around for a long time, it seems to have gained quite a lot of prominence over the last sort of few years, and is actually growing in both kind of actual numbers of people joining and accessing the services, but also it seems in just people talking about it and coverage. And I suppose that's probably a lot of your influence in making sure that the message is being spread. Do you see that? Do you think that's kind of linked to COVID, or is that just a general? Sort of trend that you think is emerging?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Andrew, because I think we play a role within the association, and we are always challenged by members in terms of how do we provide a more coherent and plan around. There's a common question: why are we not on national TV marketing campaigns and and those types of adverts, and how do we spread the message? It genuinely is still, for a huge part of the population, the best kept secret. And when people are convinced about the option to join a credit union and to see the benefits that it brings and what it does in terms of that financial resilience that I mentioned earlier, it creates a huge amount of goodwill, and I think people really love the customer member experience and stuff. So I think COVID has had an impact on it, but I think it was already there before we entered into the pandemic. And I think it's just about spreading that message. Word of mouth is still has a huge impact within our sector, but also then just trying to make sure that, I think as we, and Incuto are firmly part of this actually, as we get much closer to a digital transformation type service available, as it becomes much more attractive, the products and services that are on offer, you would imagine that will draw in many more people, including what we hope to see is a new generation of members coming along, a new younger demographic that will be attracted to it, because I think as they align, ethics and organizational behaviors is a big part of how people view who they choose to work with or to procure services with or whoever. And I think financial services is no different. So we have that real ethical edge, but if we need to align it with the digital strategies to make sure that those two things coexisting together and complementing each other could really be the sea change for the sector.
Yeah, that's it's funny, isn't it, that a lot of people question that kind of approach of saying, well, why don't you just have a TV advert? And I always sit there and think, Wonga used to sponsor Channel 5 and spend a load of money on it, and so they just had this one brand that covered everybody. But of course, the beauty of this sector is that it's a community focused, sort of individually branded. It might be your local town or your local or an employer, or some collective, and that it's very difficult to do a kind of national marketing campaign against all of that, principally because the experience of when you arrive somewhere can be very different depending on where you arrive, and so that is a real challenge. And I think you're right, that digital bit, the one thing that always keeps me focused, I think, is this idea that it's somewhere that challenges the ethics of the traditional banking system, that you can go and say, I want to put my money here because I know it's going to do something good, and that community focus is such an important piece of that. And it certainly, I think it certainly plays out, as you said, in the younger demographic. And of course, ABCUL is doing quite a lot of work around sort of bringing the young leaders of the future into the fore, right? On the CEU Futures program, which I know is sort of a big piece of this. Maybe just give us a quick background on that and where that's come from and where you see that going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you're right. From within the association, we identified a number of years ago that actually the opportunities for our young leaders, and it used to be described as the young leaders of tomorrow. And actually, I think we've shifted our opinions on that, because actually the individuals that have went through the CEU Futures program, which is an intense and immersive year-long program, where now the first year we got 20 people together, but we felt that actually as a cohort was perhaps too big a number. And so now what we do is we've got a really strong proposition to bring 8 young leaders from within the sector, from across the ABCUL membership, together to work very closely with each other. Now, the last year has been a different experience for that group, given COVID and the restrictions. But there's lots of face-to-face training and development agendas out within there. We use the Pacific Institute to attach some formal leadership training. We've got Liz Barclay, who's a huge supporter of the sector, to offer her skills in terms of our training on media and presentations and all of those different factors. And the individuals work together on projects, and they also go and visit forums and other meetings across the sector. So it's a really, really strong proposition. But going back to the point I said earlier, that actually we used to talk about supporting the leaders of tomorrow. These individuals are leaders of today. Age is no barrier at all, and they are actually providing such great inspiration and some great ideas around things around social media, financial education, products and service development, all of those different things. So we've now had over 50 graduates through the CEU Futures program. We've just launched last week the new cohort from March 2021 till March 22. Cool. So we're really excited by that, and the take up has been immense. And so I've said internally, and I think I've said many times, it's one of these standout things that I've seen within our sector, and my involvement for nearly 20 years now. It's one of the top 3 things that we've established as a program that has got a real focus on giving inspiration to our young leaders of today. It's fantastic.
No, that is really exciting, and it's nice to see that the sector's in kind of good hands when it comes to people being so enthusiastic about it. And on a previous podcast, I spoke to one of the people who's come through that program, Luke McGilvery, and you can just see the passion for wanting to take this forward and for sort of really embedding what they know into the organization and trying to attract more people in. And you mentioned about it being different experience this year, and obviously this year you've also had your first virtual conference. New and interesting. How did that go?
From our perspective, it went incredibly well. I think the overall number of people that were registered was well over 500. And we recognise that for individuals that they dipped in and out of different sessions over the 2 days. I think, using the technology, the ability to bring people together that wouldn't necessarily be there in a face-to-face environment.
Yeah.
So as you know, Andrew, and people that will be listening to this that have been part of the ABCUL conference and AGM experience, in that March weekend, that we get a really significant amount of people to come together face to face and to enjoy the sessions and the AGM and the networking and all of that social element. But we also recognise that tends to be very much a minority from individual member credit unions. Whereas I think this time the feedback that we got said, do you know what, it's been incredibly useful to allow our entire staff team to register and to dip in and out. It's been really good from a board perspective that people have been able to access it when they wouldn't necessarily have attended face to face. So I think, and we know, talking to WACU, which is the global trade body that we're members of, that they've seen something very similar, which is the ability to reach many more people within the sector. I think was the standout piece in terms of the conference, the online conference, but also the level of engagement from suppliers and exhibitors like yourselves, which we're really thankful for and grateful for that support. But also then, the level of speakers and actually some of the masterclass sessions that we put on for the first time, which was a deeper dive into particular topics, say it was credit control or marketing or lending. They went down an absolute storm, and we believe that they will firmly sit within the range of different training opportunities that we offer, or networking opportunities, learning going forward. And the last thing on it is that we were able to get that, the chat function worked really well. We got the feedback, and there was a number of people that were saying, can you make sure that this type of activity doesn't go away, whether the pandemic ends or COVID goes away, and we go back to, of course we will go back to face to face. There'll be an element of that. But I think we're very mindful that we'll keep the online learning and networking opportunities as a staple part of our ABCUL program going forward.
Yeah, it's a really funny thing, isn't it, that when you look back even a year ago, when there was that kind of really tough decision about, do we all go and sit in a room together? Do we not? The full lockdown hadn't been announced yet, but everybody knew it was coming, and it was quite scary. And the idea that just a year later you'd be running sort of a fully online conference that that is actually better attended, because, as you said, you can get more people there and they can sort of dip in and out of the things that they find really interesting, and all that kind of stuff would have just been so scary. And I guess it's kind of like the same transformation that a load of the credit unions have taken themselves. I suspect that they would have probably been the ones kicking back on it originally, and now they've had to sort of do the same thing themselves over the last year as well, and actually start to think of new ways of working. That the challenges of a year ago seem like the opportunities of today to a certain extent. And I mean, I know we found that, but have you seen that sort of playing out across the credit unions? Have they sort of engaged with you on that sort of transformation that they've had to do really fast?
They have, and even, to be fair, very early on in the process. So, what are we? Roughly the 23rd of March last, 2020, we entered into that new world, and and even by the end of April, or sometime into May, we were having stories of credit unions saying, we've introduced an app over a few day period. We've done a core conversion with no one in the building. And lots of different examples like that. And so the one thing that I would encompass it all around or envelope it in is that credit unions and their people are incredibly resilient. Even more so than they thought they were, probably. And I'm sure that goes for society in general. In terms of having to respond in such a way to an unprecedented situation in global health pandemic. But also the fact, not just about being resilient and coping with a crisis, if that's the right word for it, but also innovative as well. So they brought in new products and services. They made sure that they were reaching the vulnerable people that needed the help, the support most.
One thing that absolutely amazed me was the fact that there was an expectation that was very different to the high street banks, and was very different to other institutions. There was an expectation that credit unions remained open, able to provide access to people. And maybe it's the nature of some of the members, maybe it's the circumstances that they found themselves in. But I was absolutely blown away by the fact that they were just so readily prepared to just turn up, even though some of them were staffed by volunteers, and some of them were in vulnerable categories themselves. That they felt that kind of need to be there and continue to provide that service, where a lot of other institutions just went, we're closed, that's it, and didn't really put that in place. And I think the fact that they've taken that challenge so readily really does set them apart, and really does show that they are, that they are capable of delivering such an awful lot of goodness, and scaling, and being able to do that kind of stuff in such a short space of time is very exciting. I think it shows a lot of resilience. And in terms of the sector, where do you see this? Where do you see this kind of moving forwards? Do you think that sort of trend will continue? Do you think digital transformation is something that's going to now be on the agenda for everyone?
Very much so. I think it was on the agenda. We identified it in the town hall consultation that we did in 2019, and we could already see some great examples of digital transformation. And I actually think it's probably been brought to the fore. It's went right up the priority list in terms of business plan and objectives for many credit unions. For those that perhaps weren't necessarily looking at it as closely at this time, I think it's been a reality check in some respects. The other great thing is, this, Andrew, that credit unions will look to their peers to see what they're doing, what each other's doing.
Yeah.
And so that's I think was always really inspiring to say, well, actually, there's an opportunity here. We can see that our neighbouring credit union, or a similar credit union from an industrial perspective, have went down a particular road, and we want to get engaged in that type of service. We believe that that's right for our members, and so I think it's brought it way up the agenda much more quickly. And again, I think that's a huge positive. But getting back to the point that you made about the resilience and being readily available, and I was struck, one of our American colleagues had spoke at an online session last summer and talked about their experience from the 2008 and 2009 financial collapse. And they said the term that they used was they were disappointed in themselves that they never took as much, they never took the full opportunity that was available from 2009-10 onwards. And what they meant was that actually they had a real chance to capitalise and to embed the member relationship and the member loyalty piece much more readily. And they did that up to a point, but they felt they could have went further. And I think there's echoes of, now, a global pandemic is not the same as a financial crisis, but it has a huge repercussions. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think from that perspective, what we've said is, and we're encouraging our members and the whole sector for sure, think about, and it's going back to that piece around people will all remember how you made them feel and what you did for them in times of difficulty. And I think from a credit union perspective, it's not to be cynical or to try and capitalise on a negative. It's to say, well, use it to your advantage and embed the relationship that you have with members even more, cement it even more than you currently do. And I was really struck by that comment, because they said the end of that session, the online session, the person said, we won't make the same mistake after COVID. And I thought that to me was really telling. And I suppose that's a rallying call for the sector. Continue to embed those relationships, because they'll prove so worthwhile in the years ahead.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose when you look back at the opportunities that kind of present themselves, people do kind of just fall back into, phew, I'm glad that's over. Let's go back to normal. And actually, you do get the sense that this is something which is going to be vastly different, because normal is going to look so different, that the distance people are prepared to travel, or the way that people want to interact, and the speed at which not only the organizations sort of picked up this kind of transformation, this digital transformation, but actually the speed at which the end customer, the members, picked it up as well. And their ability to sort of engage with that, I guess, was part of that conversation. I always remember pre-pandemic, a lot of credit unions kind of taking the view that, well, our members might not really want an app, or they might not know how to use it. And then suddenly, you're sort of getting credit unions who've got 80+% of the members are online, which is way better than a high street bank sort of percentages.
Yes.
They're driving that kind of agenda, and I think that's really exciting. I think it's taken this to start it, and I genuinely hope that people keep it going, because I think the opportunity for this sector is to leapfrog everyone else and leave them standing, because everyone else has such a lot of distance to travel. And the ethics and all the other stuff that we talked about earlier, the ethics and the great product should really set them apart. I hope that's what continues.
Yeah, Andrew, I would agree, and I think there's a blend of the ethics, the value-based ethos that we have within the sector. It's about making sure that we're nimble in terms of technology, and in some respects, our size would allow us to be more reactive and more innovative than, perhaps the larger financial institutions who are still so heavily reliant on legacy systems that have got bolt-ons that perhaps we can do more from an innovation perspective. But it's also the one thing that struck me there when you were talking was, I think in the past, and I think COVID has had an impact on what we believe members will do and won't do, and how they will interact and what their preferences will be. And I don't think there's ever a case where you could say that no face-to-face will ever happen again, because even I think there'll be an element of that, and even for those those most vulnerable perhaps that need it, then there should always be a service provision that allows different touch points from a member perspective to their own credit union. But the other thing I was going to mention was, it struck me when you were talking, I think that what we've done in some cases in the past is that our credit unions have made assumptions about what their members want and would like. And I think there's a really strong story here that says, don't make assumptions, go out and test it and talk to them. And don't do it based on your gut instinct or your gut reaction, but actually do it. Get the data that tells you, well, this is what our members want, this is what they're seeing from other financial services, and this is why it makes sense. Almost get the evidence base to back up the decisions that are made.
Yeah, and of course, it is interesting now, I suppose, that actually with memberships growing, it's the people who are coming into the sector for the first time potentially who are the drivers of that new behavior. That if you ask people who've had a credit union account for the last 20 years what they want versus the people who you're trying to kind of also encourage into the sector now, probably find that it's a much younger demographic who are used to everything being on a phone or but you're right, the idea that you take away the face-to-face contact is a terrible idea, because actually what a lot of the new banks are finding is that people are now asking, well, where can I come see you?
Yes.
Where they've established themselves as an online only thing, and that model needs to shift. But I think that's the great strength of the sector, isn't it? That they're prepared to actually deal with people, and our digital bit is about making it more efficient, making it cheaper, but also taking people out of the queue that didn't really need to be there and leaving people in the queue who do, so that you can deal with them, and actually giving people a service level that's equivalent to somewhere else you might go to try and win people in. And I think that shift in people's mentality, that shift in people's understanding about what services are out there is probably really exciting. And that's the bit that, when you look at the role that technology plays, it's probably to try and start to win some of that business and win some of those people over into the sector that might not have been there before. They might have just been used to having their high street banking app, and that's all they're going to do. And that's a massive opportunity, I think, for the sector to grow.
I would agree, and I remember a few years ago where someone came along from Nationwide Building Society to talk to some of our members, and then came to one of the conference and AGM events. And I'm fairly positive the term that they used at the time was clicks and mortar. So they were very strategic in their thinking, that said, and a vast organisation serving more than 15 million people across the country, and they realised that actually there was such a strong requirement for a high street community presence, but actually align that with the digital transformation. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure that COVID has influenced some of those those individual strategies, whether it's at a bank, a building society level, or at a credit union level. But I think from a scale perspective, the face-to-face and maybe the more hand-holding approach, that can be then delivered for those that need it most. For those that are happy to interact in a way that says, I'm delighted there's an app, I'll do it in my own time and when's convenient, and I really love the way the organisation is built and the products and services you offer, then that's fine for me. That's a cohort of your membership. There'll be another cohort that wants to interact in a different way. And I think as long as we can meet those different requirements head on, then we'll do a great job.
No, absolutely. And another kind of dynamic that seems to have appeared, and it's obviously not new, but it seems to have kind of come to the fore a little bit over the last year, is some of the smaller credit unions recognizing that maybe the strength in numbers and that they need to start to look at the future and whether or not they stand alone or whether they start to merge with other credit unions. And is that something that you see as being part, a key part of the landscape of the sector moving forwards?
I think so. We identified this again as part of the town hall consultation and the output of Vision 2025 that we launched last March. And we actually, I delayed the implementation of the strategic merger task force very deliberately because of the pandemic, just to give a little bit more headspace for people to get, to think about what was happening on the ground and to make sure that they were focused on the right things. And then when we did launch that process and call for volunteers to come forward from our member base, I've never seen a reaction like it in terms of the volume of people that this topic, the very thing that we were trying to tackle, and we termed it very deliberately, Andrew, which is about strategic mergers, rather than talking just about mergers or and there's an argument about whether merger is the right word. There is a debate to be had about semantics here and the language that we use, because in lots of cases it's actually more aligned to it can be transfers of engagement, but it can be acquisitions and takeovers. And I'm not trying to be overly commercial or too capitalistic in that sense in terms of language, but it's to prompt people into thinking, okay, what is the scenario? What are we trying to achieve here? So I think that, as I mentioned earlier on, right at the start, we in 2002, just as we were getting the regulatory regime that we've had since when the FSA first introduced, and we had 698 credit unions in GB, and we've now got 280 odds. And the vast majority of that change and that decline in numbers has came about through transfers of engagement coming together. We have had some failures, of course, on there, but the reason why I say that is it's a really important part, because we're trying to prompt credit unions into thinking about whether a merger stroke transfers of engagement or conversation with a neighbouring credit union or another. Does that make sense? And when do you start that? Well, you can't start it early enough, because the beauty of these situations working is that do it from a position of strength, not a position of crisis, where a balance sheet's already weak, or whether there's a big question mark around the quality of your loan book, etc., or your active membership. So what we're trying to do is to say, is there a place for using mergers, stroke, transfers of engagement, acquisitions as a means of growth, rather than always chasing new membership? Now, there's so much room for manoeuvre within the country to gain new consumers and new members, but maybe it'll be a component part of a growth strategy for an individual credit union to look at a neighbour and to say, and actually some of the feedback we've had in the first 3 months, the first couple of meetings we've had, is those involved. We had 45 people asking to be involved. An incredible response. We've got 15 of those, and one of the things that have come out is actually, well, even if credit unions decide that a merger, stroke, transfer of engagement, acquisition is not necessarily the right thing for them at the moment, what it's prompted them is to say, but maybe collaboration is the right approach. Maybe cooperation. Maybe working together on a particular topic or a particular theme, some sort of shared service approach. And so I think even if that's the end benefit of these conversations, then I still think we've done the right thing to get it on the table.
Yeah, that collaborative approach is one of the things that sets this sector apart. I think that people are prepared to work with each other, they're prepared to share ideas, they're prepared to actually sit in a room together and talk things through. Whereas obviously if you were working in sector with the big banks, they're kind of working against each other all the time to try and win that same kind of customer base. And we certainly recognize that really early on, that it was a very rare experience that you get a group of customers sat in a room together to discuss a common challenge and looking at ways of fixing it. And we've been involved in some really exciting projects around things like Soundpound in Greater Manchester, where just a collective of credit unions get together and say, look, between us all, we cover a really big geographical area. Let's do this one thing that can go market ourselves out to an area that's greater than any one of us, and kind of pool resources. And that sort of thing is bound to drive a positive response in some way, and got quite a lot of coverage and has been successful. And it's nice to think that there's sort of this stratification of, you've got a group of people who could just be collaborating, as well as a group of people who could be strategically actually combining the balance sheets and becoming one organization. And you've got that kind of gulf of people in between who are just walking down that journey to see what's right for them. And like you say, not doing it from a position of distress, just doing it from a position of absolute strength of what makes everything better.
I think the conversation has been long overdue in terms of formalising, or maybe putting a structure to it. And I do recognise the examples that you've given. There's lots of them all across the country. But I'm also struck that we could probably do more. And we trade bodies we're working closely together. We need to lead by example on that, and that's what we're doing in many legislative reform agendas with Treasury and regulatory conversations. Mike Mercer, who used to run the Georgia League, ABCUL has that partnership, and Mike's a close friend and colleague, and I was always struck by Mike's comment, which he said, cooperation is not a natural behaviour, and I think it's so true, because there are great examples of what you've said, but actually when it comes down to the deciding on the end game, the strategy, it can be difficult for people to give a little bit of autonomy away, or a little bit of control away. So I think the more that we can do to support those conversations and those types of initiatives, the better. Because we are a cooperative sector. We don't always come at things from that mindset, and I think we can do more of that. That's not to be critical at all of what's happened in the past. It's just to say, look at the size of the credit union sector in North America. They work together when it makes sense. When it makes more sense, work together. And I think we have to do much more of that over here, for sure.
And do you see that as being the kind of natural trajectory of the sector here? That because of the way that obviously high street banks have dominated the landscape for so long, and that's not actually been the case in the US, that there's obviously a difference in the use case. Do you see this? I've always looked at this sector as primed, ready to kind of step up into that role, not to take on a lot of current accounts and things that don't necessarily make sense to the sector, but certainly to be able to fill a void of people who are looking at the way that they save, the way that they borrow, and just want to do that in a more ethical way, do that in a different way. Do you see that as something that can become much more mainstream in the UK market, and sort of shake some of the earlier stigma, I suppose, that credit unions are a lender of last resort sometimes, or a community-based thing, not a high street bank? Do you see the opportunity to kind of grow this sector to the same kind of scale that it exists in the US market? Like 55% of the population have a credit union account in the US.
I think that's a huge challenge for us, but we should be ready for it. I've described it recently as we can't keep missing open goals. We do have to be wise in terms of the opportunities that are in front of us to do that scaling approach that you mentioned, to capitalize on our ethics and our value base and ethos, as we talked about earlier, and to have the products and services alongside it. We don't have to try and mimic a bank, because people aren't looking for another bank account; they're looking for something different. Exactly. But let's remember that. in some respects, the closer we get to a fuller service, the more people will be attracted to the offering. And I think so. There is an argument to that, but that doesn't mean that you try and be everything to everyone and just become a really generalised. Because I do think we always have to remember the value proposition that makes us so strong, which is that we provide a safe and ethical savings approach at source, whether it's payroll deduction or direct debit or otherwise, and that we're offering the types of loan products that people and their families need all across the country. So do we have a wide open opportunity? Yes. The thing we have to just be cognizant of is we also have lots of competition emerging. We've got the fintech sector, which I believe we can work, collaboratively with. I don't necessarily see that as being a huge competitive threat. I think it's an advantage. We should, but we still have banks, we still have building societies, but more importantly, we also have the other lenders that are out there who are getting a hard time from regulators, and that's only appropriate. But also we have these other organisations that are probably capitalising on some of the best things about our business model, particularly that savings at source, savings from payroll, etc. So I think that's an emerging threat and competition that we need to recognise. But to answer your question, is there a huge open goal in front of us if we can get ourselves organised to the right level? Absolutely, there is.
And that kind of payroll deduction, employer engagement, all those kind of pieces which are so crucial to a kind of sustainability and the growth, I guess, are things which have been around for a long time. And it seems that a lot of the new players who are coming in are kind of taking the sort of cherry picking that to an extent, and they're not being very transparent about who they're lending to. They're not offering a full service to everybody. And they talk about one thing, which is around financial education. And that's a bit of a bugbear of mine, because you look at some of the financial education that they're talking about may not quite fit. And I've always seen financial education as a kind of core to this, that the credit unions are very good at being able to deliver a service that includes being able to help people when they need it the most, to actually understand how to make the best use of the money, and also how to kind of balance the books, make sure that they're not getting into debt unnecessarily, which seems to be a very transparent, kind of relationship where credit unions are there to try and support people rather than just lend to them, which I've always seen as a real positive. I don't know if you see that as the kind of, is that one of the messages that's not quite landing with employers, do you think?
Well, I think we can learn from the communication process that these other organisations are going through. In some respects, how slick their presentations are, and again, not to become overly commercial, that we lose the very identity or our DNA. I don't mean that at all. But actually, just let's box clever and take advantage of the things that we can learn from. Because in effect, that's what they're doing, and that's a competitive environment. That's the reality of where we work. We need to. I think what's happening is that they're managing to convince employers of that sort of wider financial resilience, financial well-being rhetoric, and that they're saying these are the products and services that they can use. But by and large, what we've seen is that they're not following through. Those products aren't landing the right way. They're not providing the level of benefit and the level of positive impact to financial resilience of an individual staff member or an individual across the country. And so, but the reality is, by that stage, is it too late? So I think we need to up our game in terms of making sure that we get the message out there, and that we need to sell and tell the story much more diligently around what we do every day to support individual members. And I know that it's more important to be doing it rather than just talking about it, but there has to be a balance between getting that message across and making sure that, again, we're not the best kept secret. And whether that means that we either partner with organisations that we believe offer a good fit in terms of our own value base, or whether we develop some of those collaterals on our own. And again, it's a mixture of face-to-face and probably online, because people will want to, and we've seen some really good examples, particularly if you think about whereby credit unions are supporting members in the lending journeys that as their credit score improves, the reality is that they will then get a better deal. They'll move on to better priced products, etc. So there is a story to be told there. I just think we need to perhaps, and ABCUL will do whatever we can to help sell that story and solution as well. But we need to lobby hard with the stakeholders and government agencies and employers to make sure that we don't get left behind.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it's a really exciting opportunity. I guess the future is wide open in terms of being able to win, which is a really nice place. At least you've got a massive opportunity ahead, as opposed to just looking behind and wondering where it all went. And that for me always seems like I always look at the market and think, if there are other people trying to get in, it's obviously the right place to be.
Yes.
If there are new people trying to break into it and claim that they're the first, then that's probably a win.
But I think the message, I agree with that wholeheartedly, Andrew. But I think the message has to be: don't just take it as a backhanded compliment. Sit up and realise, okay, well, they want to cherry pick the very best bits of our business model. Well, actually, that then means that we need to sharpen our pencil in terms of our approach and how we deliver those products and services, how we engage with employers and stakeholders. And that's the challenge, and I talk about challenges in the sense of there are things right in front of us that we can grasp and grow. And that I see that as a huge part of ABCUL's role, and I'm sure that the other trade bodies and other groups within the sector would say the same thing. We cannot allow ourselves to miss the opportunities that are in front of us in 2021 and beyond, because there are so many. We have to be able to turn this around and make sure that we're serving many more people with a wider range of products and services. We are more enabling legislative and regulatory landscape, and that we continue to innovate and do the right thing by our members. I think we can do that. There's no doubt in my mind we can.
Robert, I believe you, and you've made me feel a lot happier because, to be honest, we built our entire business on the basis that that's true. So we're right there with you. Look, it's been really interesting listening to all that. What have you got any thoughts on what people can do in the next sort of 2 to 3 years? What are the big things do you think that are going to stick, that people need to keep doing, that they've done really well over the last year?
I think so celebrate success. Be open and honest within your own organisations, your own boards and staff teams and volunteers, to talk about what does the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years look like, wherever you can. Have that vision. We have the vision to deliver the 2025 strategy that we've built, and all those 4 key themes. Look at the opportunities that might be available in terms of collaboration and closer working with other credit unions, and always have innovation and constant engagement with your membership on the board agenda at all times. If it's not there already, make sure that it's there. And what you're doing around digital transformation. If it's a new concept, then learn quickly. What has COVID done to perhaps change some of the dynamic and some of the timings of that? But let's absolutely capitalize and build on those member relationships that I talked about earlier, the member loyalties, because people will stick around when you do the right thing by them, in good times and bad times, and probably more in bad times. And so I think we've had that over the last 12 months. It's still going on. We're not out of the woods yet. But let's be really confident and look forward with great pride and look at the inspiration that the sector's providing, because there's great times ahead, but it's up to us to grasp it.
That's a great way to round up our conversation, Robert. Let's listen. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone will have been as interested as I am to hear about your thoughts on where the sector is going and where it can possibly go into the future. I hope that we can come back in a year's time again and talk about the same things and see that kind of success happening. But we're all in it together and all that. Rob, thank you. And
Pleasure,
thank you
Andrew,
very much for everybody. Thank you very much for everybody listening. And I hope you found that as interesting as I did. And we'll speak to you all again very soon.